Welcome to Building Your Best Brain podcast. If you're new here, welcome. My name's Sylvie. If you are not new here, welcome back. We are continuing with our theme, which we've done for 2 weeks now. Now we're going on week 3 of fear and the brain. So I'll include the other episodes in the show notes, but you don't need to listen to those episodes to get something out of the topic today. But we've talked about fear, where it lives in the brain, the sneaky ways it can be activated. And now we're focusing on why avoiding your fears doesn't actually work at the level of your brain. Diving into how ignoring them, avoiding them, they still have the same amount of energy and space in your brain. And if at anything, it makes them stronger and it makes them worse. And so, with that, I want to just dive in to give you guys the neuroscience behind the reasoning, as well as how to start moving forward and shifting your thinking around your fears. Now, I have to say that I do kind of have a part to play when it comes to avoidance and your fears, where I can see how what I share on this podcast may make it seem like that would be the route to go. And this is because I talk a lot about cells that fire together, wire together. I'll put the link in the show notes for the Brain's Fundamental episode, but in short, it's a neuroscience principle that has been validated through different experiments where cells that fire together wire together. So high frequency stimulation, so high activity, right? So a circuit is a group of neurons that are assembled together and they perform a specific function when they fire. And if you stimulate those set of cells at a high frequency, especially for a short period of time, the brain will understand that, all right, well, this is clearly something that we're using often and is important to our brain. So we're going to design processes, we're going to change our physical structures, maybe we change our chemical structures, our protein structures, so that these groups of cells can fire more easily with less stimulation. And a really great example of this, how this is likely true in your life, is when we think of riding a bike. So when we're younger, it takes, days, weeks, months of hopping on our bike every day or every other day, pedaling as much as we can, falling often, and then all of a sudden, after all of these tries and attempts, you're able to maintain balance on your bike really easily. Let's say you go to university or you move out of the house and you don't bring your bike with you and you don't bike for 5 years. And then your friends want to go on a picnic and they want to rent bikes and go into a really cute location. You'll hop on the bike and it'll maybe take you 30 seconds or a minute to start feeling comfortable. You don't need that same level of stimulation you did when you were learning how to ride a bike, right? You don't need days, weeks of practice to be able to find your balance. And that's because that circuit is strong and it doesn't need the same amount of stimulation to fire. And so it's very easy to think, okay, well, if I apply that to fears, then if I just ignore my fears, I'm not giving my fears any stimulation, then that circuit won't be so strong. There is some truth to that. The issue that is a little tricky is that this circuit we're talking about, which I'll call for sake of simplicity, our fear circuit, is already really strong. It's already been firing at a high stimulation, likely when you were young. And then maybe that young being like 6, 7, 8, or early adulthood, or sometime in your adolescence. And so it's already primed to fire. Your brain has already decided that this circuit is important. We need to restructure it, reconfigure it so that it can fire really easily. And so if you decide to ignore it, that doesn't change the fact that your brain has already made it a strong circuit. That doesn't remove or change the fact that you've had this high frequency firing for days, weeks, months, and for some of us, including myself, likely years. Which means it doesn't take much for it to fire. And there's some really interesting examples of this. And we dive into that a lot more in the sneaky ways that our fears are being activated without our conscious awareness. Affirmations is a really interesting one because when we use affirmations, we're usually using the opposite of whatever our fears are. We're working towards our dream. We're thinking about the physical things that represent our dream. We're thinking about the skills that we need to make our dream a reality. We're thinking about the feelings we think we would feel when we make our dream a reality. And so, one way that also makes sense when you think of the cells that fire together, wire together, is to repeatedly say those things so that you're building circuits to support it. And fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately because you know about it, you end up stimulating your brain's fear circuit in the process because it doesn't believe you yet. There's nothing to support that yet. And so instead, what it does is it is already primed because the circuit is so strong to be stimulated by that statement. So things like, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire. That fear center in your brain that's like, I'm going to be broke forever, is firing just as often as you're saying, I'm a millionaire. So through affirmations, you're actually making your fear stronger. And there's other small ways that it can go off as well, around the news, conversations, posts that come up on Instagram or TikTok, because we're not in complete control of our environment. And so our circuit, right, in our brain is essentially filtered to be using our stronger circuits because they take less energy, right? The brain has designed it so that it doesn't need as much stimulation, which is why creating new circuits, which we'll talk about another time very soon, takes more energy. It takes more brain power. It's going to utilize our strongest circuits, which means that it's going to find anything in our outside world to stimulate it. And we can't control everything in our outside world. This, I definitely don't have to convince you. And a really good way for you to know if you have really strong fear circuits in your brain would be when you have conversations with people, whether that's, and it's not even, it doesn't have to be a partner, it doesn't have to be a boss, it doesn't have to be a relationship where there's maybe higher stakes. It could even be with strangers or people you don't know super, super well. And they say something, and at the time, when you're able to look back, it is innocuous in the sense that, it's pretty neutral. It's not outlandish or emotional or anything like that, but you take it super personally. And you don't understand why you're taking it super personally or why you feel attacked or why you feel called out or why, and you're creating like a whole story around it later. But the reality is that, they likely weren't saying anything about you. They likely weren't even thinking about you. But the strongest circuits in your brain were able to take whatever they said as stimulation. And that's the issue with ignoring your fears, because controlling the outside world is near impossible. And focusing on the positive and ignoring your fears doesn't change the fact that your fears are incredibly strong and are going to find anything. And that's why avoidance when it comes to fears, with the caveat of like, it's not a new fear. If you have a new fear or a new paranoia, then maybe ignoring it would work. But if it's a strong, reoccurring, has been around for a long time, ignoring it just won't work. It just won't work. And so What also doesn't work, I promise I'll get to what works. I feel like I just said that. It doesn't work like 3 times, but I promise you I will share with you what works. You also don't want to get into a situation where you're firing your fear circuits a lot, right? Because that also will stimulate your fear circuit. So then if, ignoring it and avoiding it doesn't work, and then having it fire all the time doesn't work, then what actually does? Are you stuck with it forever? You're definitely not. This is something that I've done a ton of work on myself. It's exactly what I work on with my clients with the Fire and Rewire program, pairing it with at-home EEG devices that record your brain waves, and we use your brain waves to help guide your meditation into different states to kind of help with all of the rewiring of this. But a big thing that we do after we identify what our fears are, which is one of the earlier episodes that I'll drop here related to fear in your brain, because we can't change anything we don't know exists, is finding a way to confront your fears without having a full-blown stress spiral. Because our fears are in our amygdala. It's the fear center of our brain. It has branching into regions that are involved in our brain's stress response. And so activating our stress response over and over and over again as we're confronting our fears also doesn't help. And this is for the Fire and Rewire program, what we do in our second month. So in our first month, we focus on identification, seeing all the ways that it's coming up. And then we get into down regulating and neutralizing. And this is where we are finding ways for the circuit to fire less, to have less stimulation. And ignoring it doesn't work, but a few things do. And there's 2 principles that I'm going to talk about, which is desensitizing and also neutralizing. And I'm going to use money as a topic, as an example. Fears around money, that you never have enough. Even if you have enough, like, is it going to stay forever? Do I need to be hyper vigilant? Am I going to be able to recreate this money in the future? All fear, money fears. So desensitization is a pharmacological term. So we do see it in the drug world, where when you have a drug at high doses, or not even at high doses, but frequently for long periods of time, your brain will compensate by either making more receptors or having more access to these neurotransmitters, so that the feeling that you get, right, that drug effect, whatever that drug is for you. And again, this isn't just recreational drugs, this is also drugs that are used to treat diseases and so on. The effect becomes less and less because your body is adjusting to create a new baseline, to create a new point at which the drug is effective. And that's why if you're on a medication for a long time, usually over the course of the time you're on it, you have to increase your dose because the dose is no longer effective. Your body has created compensatory mechanisms to adjust it. Desensitization is also studied when we look at neurobiology of behavior or psychological underpinnings of behavior, with the idea that if you're presented with something chronically, that you are expecting something and you are more equipped to deal with it, or you have a what we call stereotyped, which is just a repetitive response to it. They've done this with fear conditioning. They've done this with reward, and often with these experiments, they will do something called a primer. And this is where they will have a condition and they give a cue for that condition. And that can be a light flickers, that can be a bell turns on. And, over time, you can see desensitization where the reaction to those cues are less, but even priming itself is really interesting because it shows us how our brain will begin to associate different states to different cues. And so, a really famous experiment would have been Pavlov's dogs. So, Pavlov is this old psychologist, definitely I was going to say foundational member, but that's not the right word. Founding, maybe. Anyway, it's definitely foundational knowledge. If you take in any psych course, any neuroscience course, I'm sure you've heard of this experiment where he measured the dog's ability to salivate when presented food, and he started presenting food with this bell. And he trained the dogs to associate that bell with food to the point that he could ring the bell and the dogs would salivate in the absence of food. And so, with these kind of two sort of complementary principles of desensitization and then priming and pairing, we can use that to start reducing the response, the fear response. And so, if we use money as an example, if you're somebody that has a fear with money, you are doing one of two things. You're likely looking at your bank account all the time, tracking all of your expenses, being super hyper vigilant, or you are not looking at your bank account and it is stressful to look at your bank account. You're avoiding it as much as you can. And we're going to use the last one as an example in this case because it works really well. A way to start desensitizing this fear reaction when it comes to your bank account is to look at it more. Looking at it more frequently. And, the more you do that, the less it's likely that the less fear stimulation could happen if you look at it more and you pair it with something that's going to help down regulate your fear response. And so when it comes to money and money fears, and it's fun because a lot of money people online, like money coaches, will talk about having a money date, and they spend a lot of time on asking you to start cultivating a ritual or a practice that feels really great. And this is to counteract the fact that it is stressful for a lot of people to look at their bank account. So if you're looking at it more frequently, you're less likely to have that fear activation. You have a chance that maybe it'll get desensitized the more you look at it, especially if you pair it with something that is ultimately soothing and relaxing. So lighting a candle, doing breathwork exercise, maybe journaling after, maybe rewarding yourself with a treat every time you do look at your bank account and you try to make it an enjoyable experience. That is one way to confront your fears, potentially decreasing the fear circuits being able to fire, and to not allow yourself to have a full-blown spiral. Because that's the thing, if you don't pair it. If you don't pair it with something to help kind of counteract it or reward yourself for doing the damn thing, then you're just going to allow yourself to get into a full-blown spiral more often. So that's one way. And that's something that I always, depending on who I'm working with and what their core circuit is, that'll be different for everyone. Neutralizing, however, is something that I teach every single person that goes to the Fire and Rewire program and has made a huge difference in my fear circuitry and how I show up in my day-to-day life. And I have an episode on that I'll put below as well, and an example of how I was able to basically publish a paper in my PhD because I was able to neutralize it. And so neutralizing is essentially looking at the positive and the negatives of something, with the idea being that there is nothing in this world that is 100% positive or 100% negative. There's always a bit of both in whatever decision, in whatever event, in whatever scenario you find yourself in. Now, if we're to use the bank account as an example, and essentially looking at what are the pros and cons of your current financial situation. When you're neutralizing something, what you're doing is, because it's interesting, you can be tipping into your stress response if you think something's all negative. And I think I don't have to convince you guys of this. We've likely all experienced this before. It's the same if something is all positive as well, because you place a sense of urgency. You can also get into a scenario where, I'll be happy when X, or I'll feel safe when X. And so you place a condition which places urgency, and that itself can tip into your stress response. So it's really important when you're doing these neutralizing exercises that you look at both sides of the scenario. So if we're using the bank account as an example, we would see all the negative reasons around our money situation, right? Which could be having debt, it could be making money in a way that you don't want to be making money right now. It could be a raise that you didn't get. It could be maybe getting frustrated at how you're managing your money, right? Like looking back at some of your purchases, you're like, oh, like, did I really want to spend $100 on that? Looking back, maybe not. Now I can't get that money back. And then looking at all of the positives. And this can be tricky because I don't want you to get into affirmation territory where it's like, well, it's okay. I'm meant to be a millionaire one day, because your brain is just going to activate your fears. But you can look at all the things you did buy that you are happy about. You can look at the luxuries you have, big or small, because of your financial situation. If you're able to pay rent, if you were able to eat, if you were able to clothe yourself, if you were able to afford a little treat for yourself, those are all positive things. And, there are a lot of downsides to having a lot of money. It's not a completely positive scenario. A few of those, which you can go into the neutralizing episode to really dive deeper on, would be less motivated, right? So a part of having less money is you are potentially more motivated to make more in a creative way, right? Like getting creative about what you're spending on. If you're somebody that wants to start a business or has a product idea, maybe you'll have motivation to actually get that going or to put yourself out there. Less to manage, right? More money can sometimes mean more problems, right? Like having more accounts, deciding where to put it in, maybe feeling more stressed because you feel like you have more to lose. There's lots of ways that you can look at the money of your dreams potentially not being a positive thing, and also appreciate where you're at right now in terms of your money being really supportive. It's also a distraction, right? Money can be a distraction from these fear circuits that we are not avoiding anymore. We're not avoiding them anymore. We are dealing with them. And the reason why we're dealing with them is because controlling your fears from the inside being looking at your own behaviors, your own reaction, your own brain, taking that responsibility and agency, addressing them this way makes the outside world so much easier. If think of all, and this is again earlier episodes, but all the ways that your fears can be triggered. Imagine what would happen if you shifted that from the inside and they no longer triggered you anymore. Imagine the amount of energy you would have if they no longer triggered you anymore. Imagine the amount of mental space you would have if they no longer triggered you anymore. Imagine what it would feel like in your body every single day if you didn't get that same level of triggered anymore. Even if, and this is the part that gets cool, right? And I see it with my clients, and it's such a cool thing. The same thing happens to them, and they can see how their reaction is different. And it doesn't even have to be like a quote unquote perfect, right? Like a family member can say something, and you have a moment of, ugh, don't like that. And then the moment's over. You're not spiraling out. You're not thinking about it on the drive home. You're not journaling about it. You're not beating yourself up for what had happened. You're not messaging that family member being like, I need to block you. Like, I can't handle your presence at all. It's really, when it comes to the brain and rewiring and neuroplasticity, it's incredible. It is cool, all the things you can shift and change, but it's around shifting things that are going to bring more energy back to you. Because when you get to choose how you spend your energy, you get to choose how you live your life truly. And it gives you this empowerment and agency that is really unmatched by anything, right? Like tons of money can't give that to you. The perfect career can't give that to you. The perfect partner, relationship, perfect family can't give that to you. Perfect home can't give that to you. But you, again, with time and doing things step by step in a specific order, which is why I've laid out the episodes this way, right? So the first 2 episodes help identify, see where it's being activated, and now you're confronting it in a way you're not avoiding it to have that true agency in how you spend your energy. If you have questions, thoughts, anything you're uncertain about, please feel free to leave a comment. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction, encourage you along the way. This is work that people really don't do, not because they don't want to, although some people probably don't want to, which I can understand. It can be a bit scary, but I find it's not explained in a way where you can actually take the knowledge and go apply it. So if I can help you in any small way apply this knowledge, I want to. It would be an absolute joy and pleasure. So please leave it in the comments. You can also find me on synaptic.sylvie, TikTok, Instagram. You can always send me a direct message there. And for the next episode, we're going to be building off of this information in a way that is going to be more fun. I don't know if you found these last couple episodes fun. They're fun for me, but it's definitely more foundational knowledge, building blocks that are necessary. We need these steps in order to get to the part where we start to flip our fear and flip it in a way so that we end up more resilient. So I would love for you guys to stick around with that. And of course, if there's anything I can support you with so that you can take that next episode and be able to run with it, please don't be shy. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Celebrate the fact that you got through this episode, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. Take care.